Hey everybody, Aaron Cowan, Sage Dynamics, and this is the Modlite PLH version 2. Last year I was very happy to get a chance to take a look at the PLH and then the OKW heads from Modlite. The PLH was more of a general purpose head. It didn't have as much candela, but it had a really good lumen output. So it made a lot of people happy for CQB use and for some intermediate distance work. It's a great light. However, it doesn't have candela like I want candela. And that's just something I have to accept with certain lights, is they're going to give me a lot of good spill, but not as much punch out and reach out and give me PID as I want. When I'm looking at a light, things that I'm looking for is I want some good spill. I want to be able to light up the periphery, if you will, but I also want to reach out and remove the visual horizon from potential bad guys. The more candela I have, the further away I can identify targets, but also the further away I can disrupt or remove someone's visual horizon, which is a kind of a big deal for me. And it's not something we had until recently from a lot of light companies, where candela just wasn't the big concern in small handheld, weapon-mounted, handgun or rifle-mounted lights. So I wasn't really surprised when Modlite contacted me and told me they were doing a version 2 of the PLH. Once I got one, they sent one out to me, I was able to see what changes were made and if those changes were improvements or not. Generally, I'm not one to do comparison reviews, but I felt like it was kind of reasonable this time, since we're looking at a version 2 over version 1 of the original PLH. The original PLH had 1,500 lumens and pushed 29,000 candela, which are respectable numbers. The new version of the PLH, the version 2, pushes 1,350 lumens at 54,000 candela. So there's some give and take there. I'm getting more candela. And the first thing I noticed about it was I'm getting pretty much just as much spill. I'm getting just as much peripheral lighting, if you will, but I'm getting a lot more reach with that candela, that intensity, point intensity at a distance. Now, comparing that to the OKW, which is something that people want to do, the OKW is more of a long range, intermediate to long range distance light that they produce. That particular light produces 680 lumens, which is a low number if you're not appreciative of candela, but it pushes 69,000 candela, which gives really good PID. I've done a video on both the version 1 of the PLH and the OKW, and you can check out my OKW video if you're interested in what kind of performance you're getting for those 680 lumens. Because one of the things that we've had in the past with flashlight manufacturers as far as marketing goes is they just quote lumen numbers. I want to know candela. I've always wanted to know candela. And up until recently, a lot of manufacturers didn't even put their candela information out there, so it was kind of, you had to see it, you had to kind of get a feel for it, you had to understand the differences between different lights. I primarily used, during my evaluation, I primarily used the version 2 as a handheld, and I found it to be a very, very useful little light. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm perfectly happy throwing an OKW on Modlite's handheld body and using that as an everyday carry handheld light, but I wanted to give the version 2 a long shakedown. I've had it for a few months now, so I've had a lot of time to really evaluate it. I ran it as a handheld, but I also threw it on a rifle and ran it as a rifle-mounted light. One of the things that's going to come up is, does it have the same durability and functionality that I saw from other products from Modlite? So I wanted to see during the burn down process for a separate product if it was going to cause any issues whatsoever with the light, the concussive blast from the muzzle device, or that buildup of heat created in that 500 round burn down, because it's an accelerated rate of fire, 500 rounds as quickly as I can feed them through the gun. So here is a burn down. 500 rounds, roughly took me about 4 minutes to shoot 500 rounds. No heat issues created on the light. First to last round, no functionality issues. Everything worked out all right. I didn't have any warping or melting inside the battery compartment. I didn't have any damages to the electronics or the battery or anything like that. So that's what we're looking for. So surviving the burn down for a weapon mounted light, no big deal. And again, this is just the head. You can get it as a handheld, or you can get it as one of their weapon mounted lights, and it can run on the 18650 or the 18350 battery, so you can have the shorter or the longer battery body, if you will, depending on what you're going to put it on. Just continuing using it, one of my initial impressions, and one thing that was pretty obvious, is comparing the PLH's performance to the version 2's performances. There's definitely a noticeable difference, and mostly just reach, how much light is getting downrange, not just in more artificial conditions, because most ranges, when you shoot low light on them, there's not a lot of ambient light other than, you know, the stars, or maybe like a security light on a building, or a little shack light or something like that. A lot of ranges don't introduce urban type lighting or even rural type lighting into the range environment, which is something I like to do. When I practice in low light, I like to backlight my targets. I like to side light my targets, because those are realistic lighting conditions that you might encounter just, you know, for navigation purposes using a handheld light, or for law enforcement self-defense dealing with a threat, having to positively identify them. If the backlighting overpowers whatever your handheld or weapon mounted light is, you may not be able to clearly PID your bad guy to see if he's armed or not. And that's a big concern that I have. So I was very, very preferential to the OKW, because it pretty much defeats any backlighting, realistic backlighting, that I was able to put it up against. Was the version 2 going to be able to hang, even though the performance is just on, you know, looking at quoted numbers? Am I losing a lot of performance going down in Candela? The camera doesn't accurately capture what the human eye sees, but I make sure I maintain my settings as closely as possible to what I see with my naked eye, to give you guys the best representation of what I'm actually seeing, not just what the camera is able to capture. Because I can do some fun stuff with the camera to make lights seem cooler or not as cool if I wanted to. It's not something I want to do. So I just usually look down range, and I make my camera adjustments to get it as close to the human eye as possible. You'll notice here the original PLH, it's got a really good field of vision. I'm getting a lot of horizon light out of it, but I'm not really getting a lot of downrange push with it. When you put it up against backlighting, it still does well, but it doesn't do as well as maybe some people may prefer. And that's why a lot of people went with the OKW over the PLH, especially people who have a lot of experience in low light, have a lot of low light technique, and they use and work in low light quite a bit. Using the version 2, I kind of get the best of both worlds. I don't want to call it a compromise, but there's a Venn diagram there that we have to look at. And the Venn diagram is pretty straightforward. You got the PLH and you got the OKW, and there wasn't a whole lot of overlap. Now with the version 2, I have some overlap going on, and I've got the version 2 sitting right in there in that nice little Venn diagram where the two circles meet between the PLH and the OKW. I'm still getting good horizon light, good spill, if you will. Would be good for CQB indoor lighting, but now I have an intermediate range light as well, so if it's more of an urban purpose carbine, even rural purpose carbine, if your realistic engagement range is, you know, out to 100 meters, this light's going to do what you need it to do. It's not going to lack for the ability to reach out and positively identify whatever you're trying to look at, it be it a threat or a wild animal or whatever the environment you find yourself in. You're going to be able to overcome that ambient lighting, that light pollution, that backlighting very, very well. And that's something that I was definitely looking for. I still would prefer this more of a handheld light. I think on my rifles I'm still going to keep that OKW running, but having the version 2 for a handheld light is a nice addition, and it's definitely a nice improvement over the original PLH. Now, other durability issues. People want to know, is the light going to be able to handle the rigors of duty? For law enforcement or military purposes, is the light going to be able to handle getting bumped and braked and kicked around and scuffed on and knocked into door frames and stuff like that? I mainly introduced drop testing as a standard for my optic testing, but I had some people in the past bring it up, why don't you do that with weapon lights that you review? And that's something I did start doing, and it's no different here. Multiple drop tests with the version 2 of the PLH, and I wasn't able to break the lens, wasn't able to create any issues. They use a boron float glass in the lens, which there are some other light companies out there that use that, and I've been able to break those lights very, very easily, either through intermittent or unintentional contact with a foreign surface, or they'd get broke by simunitions rounds or UTM rounds during force-on-force training. This light has taken multiple direct hits from UTM, both rifle UTM and handgun UTM, no breakage, and of course from all the drop testing, impact testing, lens is good to go. And that's exactly what I want to see as far as durability goes of the light itself. So maybe the PLH didn't do everything you wanted it to do from Modlite. Now you have a version 2 which has some dramatic improvements in overall performance and gives me kind of an intermediate distance light. I think the PLH is still the version 1 is still a good light, especially if it's going to be dedicated for an indoor light. I don't like flood only. I'm not in that camp. I like a lot of lumens, but I also like a lot of candela. But I can see how some people, if they just don't have the experience or the time to go out and take low light classes and learn the proper techniques, then having just spill only is something that's going to be beneficial for them, if nothing else, and for positive identification inside their own home. Taking the light outside of the house, I need that candela. And now I have good lumens and good candela in the version 2 of the PLH without necessarily having to go to the OKW. Because the one bad thing about the OKW that some people do experience is when they're trying to do administrative tasks with it, that candela is very overpowering. If you take an OKW and try to read a piece of paper in front of your face, that's a self-correcting action. You're probably not going to do that again. You have to cup your hand over it to kind of let out just a little bit of light. And for some people, that's just something they don't want to do, which I completely understand, because for a lot of us, our handheld lights anyway, serve administrative purposes much more often than they serve self-defense purposes. So the OKW can, for a lot of people, and I'd be willing to agree with this, is a little bit too much horsepower for someone who does a lot of administrative tasks with their handheld light. If I was still on the job working patrol, I probably wouldn't have an OKW head on my handheld, because I spent a lot of time reading things, searching vehicles, doing stuff like that with the light very, very close to barriers and where I literally had to look at them. Unlike indoors, using the OKW for more tactical or more self-defense roles, if I'm worried about a white wall, I'll just umbrella light or baseboard light. But for administrative tasks, a little bit different. So if you're curious about what the improvements were on the OKW, or I'm sorry, the PLH version 2, this is exactly what you're looking at. You're getting improved performance overall, and I'd say it's a very good all-around light without any real compromise. I think it's an improvement to the PLH without drifting into the domain of the OKW, that extreme long-range light. So I'd say intermediate distances and the PLH version 2 is an awesome light. I'm Aaron Count with Sage Dynamics. Train accordingly.